Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? For 10 years, I played the part of the perfect wife and daughter-in-law, only to have it all blow up in my face. They thought they could break me, but they severely underestimated the woman they were dealing with. This is the story of how their vicious betrayal unearthed a strength I never knew I had. I am Gertrude, 35 years old, and until last month I thought I knew what loyalty meant. For 10 years, I tried to be the perfect wife to Edward and the ideal daughter-in-law to his family. I baked Harold his favorite pies. I attended charity galas with Vivian. I even tolerated Elaine and her snippy comments, which was a full-time job in itself. But none of that mattered when my sister-in-law slammed those photos on the anniversary dinner table. My blood ran cold as Edward refused to meet my eyes. 10 years of family devotion shattered in seconds as my fingers trembled reaching for my purse. They had no idea what I was about to reveal. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to deal with toxic in-laws. Trust me, you will want to see how this ends. Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, I had a fairly normal middle-class childhood. My parents taught high school and we lived comfortably, if not luxuriously. I excelled in school, especially in writing and design, which eventually led me to pursue marketing in college. Northwestern University gave me the education, but my internships at several Chicago agencies gave me the real-world experience that shaped my career. I met Edward at an industry conference in Dallas 12 years ago. He was there representing his family business, Harcourt Manufacturing, and I was attending with the boutique agency I worked for at the time. We quite literally bumped into each other at the coffee station between sessions, and he helped me clean up my spilled latte with such earnest apologies that I couldn't help but find him charming. "Please let me replace it," he insisted, his blue eyes genuinely concerned about my caffeine deprivation. "Only if you sit with me while I drink it," I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. That coffee turned into dinner, which turned into breakfast the next morning. By the end of the 3-day conference, we had exchanged numbers and made plans for him to visit me in Chicago the following weekend. There was an ease between us that I had never experienced before. Edward was thoughtful, funny, in an understated way, and genuinely interested in my work and opinions. The fact that he was undeniably handsome with his dark hair and tall frame didn't hurt either. What Edward didn't tell me right away was that Harcourt Manufacturing wasn't just some random company. It was a fourth-generation family business worth well over $50 million. And he was the sole male heir. I learned this several weeks into our relationship when he invited me to his loft in Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood. The doorman, the private elevator, and the stunning view of Lake Michigan were my first clues that Edward wasn't just comfortably middle-class like me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, feeling slightly betrayed as I stared at the original artwork adorning his walls. Edward shrugged, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "People treat me differently when they know. They either want something from me or assume I'm a spoiled trust fund kid who never worked for anything. I wanted you to know the real me first." I appreciated his honesty, but little did I know this was my first glimpse into the complicated relationship Edward had with his family's wealth and expectations. It would be another month before I met the Harcourts in person, and by then I was already falling in love with their son. Harold and Vivian Harcourt lived in a sprawling mansion in Lake Forest, complete with manicured gardens and a 3-car garage housing vehicles worth more than my entire college education. My first dinner there was an exercise in intimidation. Harold, a tall, imposing man with silver hair and piercing eyes that matched his son's, interrogated me about my family background and career aspirations while barely touching his meal. Vivian, perfectly coiffed and wearing pearls for a family dinner, smiled tightly as she corrected my table etiquette with subtle comments. "Gertrude, dear, we used the outermost fork first," she murmured when I reached for the wrong utensil. "And red wine glasses have stems for a reason." Then there was Elaine, Edward's younger sister by 2 years. Where Edward had inherited his father's height and mother's warm coloring, Elaine was petite with cold blue eyes that assessed me like I was an item at auction she was considering bidding on. She had the same prestigious education as her brother, but unlike Edward, who worked in the family business, Elaine had never held a real job. Instead, she managed the family's social calendar and charitable foundation, positions that gave her purpose without accountability. "So you work in advertising?" she asked, making it sound like I sold snake oil door to door. How fascinating. I suppose someone has to convince people to buy things they don't need. Edward squeezed my hand under the table, a silent apology and encouragement. I smiled brightly and responded, "Actually, my specialty is helping sustainable brands connect with consumers who share their values. My last campaign helped a zero-waste company increase sales by 70% while reducing their carbon footprint." Harold actually looked up at that, a flicker of respect crossing his features before he returned to his steak. It wasn't much, but it felt like a victory. Despite the chilly reception, Edward and I continued to grow closer. 2 years into our relationship, he proposed during a weekend trip to Door County, Wisconsin. The ring was his grandmother's, a stunning Art Deco piece that Vivian had apparently been saving for the right woman to join their family. I chose to take it as acceptance rather than ownership. Our wedding plans quickly spiraled beyond my control. What I had envisioned as a modest garden ceremony with 100 guests morphed under Vivian's guidance into a 300-person extravaganza at the Chicago Botanical Gardens with a 10-piece orchestra and 5-course dinner. Edward assured me his parents wanted to give us this gift, and I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to seem ungrateful. "Just let Mom handle the details," Edward suggested when I expressed concern about the growing guest list. "It makes her happy, and honestly, it's easier than fighting her on it." This would become a pattern in our marriage that I failed to recognize as problematic until it was almost too late. After the honeymoon, a 2-week tour of the Greek islands that was the one part of our wedding I had insisted on planning myself, we returned to Chicago to start our married life. The Harcourts had given us a generous down payment for a brownstone in Lincoln Park as a wedding gift. Another gesture that came with invisible strings I wouldn't fully understand until years later. I continued advancing in my career, eventually becoming a senior account director at one of Chicago's most prestigious agencies. Edward rose through the ranks at Harcourt Manufacturing, being groomed to eventually take over from his father. Our lives settled into a comfortable routine that included mandatory Sunday dinners at the Harcourt Mansion and holidays spent according to Vivian's exacting traditions. For years, I tried to be the perfect daughter-in-law. I learned to make Harold's favorite desserts from scratch. I joined Vivian's garden club despite my notable lack of horticultural skills. I attended charity galas and country club events, wearing the appropriate designer labels and making the right small talk. I even tried to bond with Elaine, inviting her to spa days and lunches that invariably ended with her making passive-aggressive comments about my clothes, hair, or career. "It must be so fulfilling to have your own money," she once said over manicures. "Though I imagine Edward appreciates you keeping busy while he handles the important work at Harcourt." The underlying message was always clear. I might be Edward's wife, but I would never truly be a Harcourt. I was tolerated, not accepted. Things began to shift about 2 years ago when I received a significant promotion to executive vice president, effectively making me the breadwinner in our marriage. Edward was genuinely proud and supportive, but his family's reaction was noticeably cooler. "I suppose this means we'll see even less of you at family functions," Vivian remarked when we shared the news at Sunday dinner. "Are you sure you can handle the pressure?" Harold asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "These executive positions can be quite demanding." Elaine simply smirked and asked if my new salary came with a clothing allowance, since presentation is so important at that level. What bothered me most wasn't their thinly veiled disapproval, but Edward's silence in the face of it. He would squeeze my hand under the table or give me apologetic looks, but he never actually defended me or called out his family's behavior. When I brought this up on the drive home, he would sigh and say, "That's just how they are, Gertie. They don't mean anything by it." But they did mean something by it, and the undercurrents of tension would soon erupt into a tsunami that threatened to wash away everything we had built together. The first major crack in the facade appeared on my 35th birthday. I had requested a small dinner with friends at our favorite neighborhood restaurant, something casual and fun. Instead, I arrived home from work to find our house transformed into a formal cocktail party venue with caterers buzzing around and flower arrangements worthy of a magazine spread. "Surprise!" Edward announced proudly when I walked through the door in my work clothes, clearly confused. "Mom thought you deserved something special for your milestone birthday." Before I could respond, Vivian emerged from our kitchen, wearing an apron over her designer dress, acting as if she were the hostess in my home. "There you are, Gertrude. Quick, go change into something more appropriate. Guests will arrive in 30 minutes. I looked around at my transformed living room. Who exactly is coming? Just some close friends and family, Edward assured me. About 40 people. The guest list, it turned out, included exactly 3 of my actual friends. The rest were Harcourt family members, business associates, and Vivian's social circle. People who knew me as Edward's wife, not as Gertrude. I plastered on a smile and played along, but something shifted inside me that night. As I watched Vivian holding court in my living room, accepting compliments for the beautiful party she had arranged for her dear daughter-in-law, I realized how much of my identity had been subsumed by the Harcourt family. The following weeks brought new challenges at work. Our agency had landed a major international client, and I was put in charge of coordinating our global strategy. This meant longer hours, more meetings with predominantly male colleagues, and occasional travel. Edward was supportive in theory, but in practice he began questioning my schedule and whereabouts with increasing frequency. "Tim again?" he would ask when I mentioned a meeting with our creative director. "You two seem to spend a lot of time together." "It's called work, Edward," I would reply, trying to keep my tone light. "Would you prefer I meet with Tina from accounting instead?" He would laugh it off, but the questions continued. Why was I texting after dinner? Who was calling so late? Did this business trip really require an overnight stay? Then came the strange coincidences. During a quick business trip to New York, I literally bumped into Elaine coming out of my hotel as I was going in. "What a surprise!" she exclaimed with exaggerated shock. "I'm here for a charity board meeting. What are you doing here?" 2 weeks later, she appeared at the same restaurant in Detroit where I was having dinner with clients, then again at a coffee shop near our Chicago office, each time with a plausible explanation that nonetheless left me feeling unsettled. Digital anomalies began piling up as well. Emails I was certain I had received from male colleagues would disappear from my inbox. Photos from work events would somehow appear in family members' phones with innocent interactions captured at angles that made them appear more intimate than they were. "Who's the guy with his arm around you?" Edward asked one evening, showing me a photo I had never seen from our agency holiday party. "That's Diego, our new art director." He was drunk and falling over, and I was helping him stand up straight for the group photo. I peered at the image. "Where did you get this?" "Elaine sent it to me. Said she saw it on someone's social media." But none of my coworkers had posted photos from the private event. When I checked our company's secure photo sharing site, I found that someone had accessed it using my credentials from an unknown device. The invasion of privacy extended to our home. Items in my office would be slightly moved when I returned from work. My laptop would be in a different position than I had left it. Once I found my personal journal moved from its hiding place in my desk drawer. When I confronted Edward about these oddities, he dismissed my concerns as paranoia from work stress. "Maybe you should cut back on hours," he suggested during one such conversation. "Mom thinks you're developing workaholic tendencies. She knows a great therapist who specializes in work-life balance." His father had his own suggestions. "I'd be happy to take a look at your finances, Gertrude," Harold offered during a Sunday dinner. "For tax purposes, of course. With your new position, you might be making some errors in your reporting." The monitoring became more blatant. After Elaine borrowed my phone to make a call when hers supposedly died, I discovered a tracking app installed that I had never authorized. Edward began checking my phone while I showered, something I discovered only because he forgot to close my text messages one morning. My friendship with Thomas, a college friend who had recently moved to Chicago after his divorce, became a particular point of contention. "Thomas again?" Edward asked when I mentioned meeting Thomas for lunch. "That's the 3rd time this month. Don't you think it's inappropriate to spend so much time with another man? He's going through a difficult time and he's my friend," I explained, increasingly frustrated. "We've known each other since freshman year of college. You've met him multiple times." "People change," Edward replied cryptically, "especially men after divorce." The unannounced visits from my in-laws escalated as well. I had begun working from home one day a week to focus on strategic planning, and somehow that day became the family's favorite time to just drop by. We were in the neighborhood, Vivian would say, despite living 30 minutes away in the opposite direction from anywhere she normally went. I thought you might like some company since Edward is at the office, Elaine would offer, making herself comfortable at my dining table where my confidential work documents were spread out. Once I returned from a quick grocery run to find my home office door ajar, though I distinctly remembered closing it. When I quietly approached, I overheard Edward and Elaine in hushed conversation. We need more, Elaine was saying. This isn't enough to convince anyone. She'll be back soon, Edward replied, his voice tense. We should go. When I deliberately made a noise in the hallway, they emerged with casual smiles, Edward claiming he was showing Elaine our recent vacation photos. But the computer they had allegedly been viewing was still showing my email inbox. That night, I began documenting everything. Each strange occurrence, each coincidence, each invasion of privacy went into a password-protected document stored on a cloud drive only I could access. I wasn't sure what was happening, but my instincts screamed that something was very wrong. When I tried once more to discuss my concerns with Edward, he became defensive. You're being ridiculous, he snapped. My family loves you. They've given us everything. This promotion is making you suspicious of everyone, and frankly, it's not attractive. His words stung, but they also confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Edward would never take my side against his family. Whatever was happening, I would need to figure it out on my own. The following week, I met my friend Nicole for lunch. Unlike the friends I had lost touch with after marrying into the Harcourt orbit, Nicole had remained stubbornly present in my life. A cybersecurity specialist with a healthy distrust of authority, she had never warmed to the Harcourts, and they had never bothered to charm her. Something weird is going on, I confided after we ordered. My devices are acting strange, and I think someone's monitoring my communications. Nicole didn't laugh or dismiss me. Instead, she reached for my phone. Let me see. 20 minutes later, her expression had turned from curious to furious. Gert, your phone has 3 different monitoring applications installed. 2 are commercial spyware that parents use to track teenagers. But this third one is more sophisticated. It captures keystrokes, accesses your camera remotely, and sends all your data to an external server. My stomach dropped. Could it be some kind of work security thing? Not unless your company routinely violates federal privacy laws. She looked up at me, deadly serious. Someone is surveilling you professionally and thoroughly. That afternoon, Nicole set me up with clean devices. I've installed counter-monitoring software, she explained, showing me how to access the logs. It will record anyone who tries to access your information, but you should act normal. Keep using your compromised devices too. Let's see who we catch. It didn't take long. Within 3 days, the logs showed multiple access attempts from IP addresses associated with the Harcourt family home, Elaine's apartment, and most devastatingly, devices registered to Edward. But why? What possible reason could my husband and his family have for spying on me so extensively? The answer came the following week. Using a shopping trip as cover, I followed Elaine from her favorite boutique to a nondescript office building in the West Loop. Through the street-level window, I watched her greet a middle-aged man in a cheap suit, his receding hairline and bulky frame giving him the look of a former athlete gone to seed. I snapped photos with my clean phone, then ran the man's face through a social media search. James Porter, private investigator, formerly of the Chicago PD. His client list wasn't public, but his business address matched several payments I found when I carefully searched through our joint account records. Edward had been paying Porter $2,000 a month for the past 3 months. That night I dug deeper. Public records revealed that Harcourt Manufacturing had posted significant losses for the past 2 quarters. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to raise eyebrows among investors. More interesting was what I found buried in old business news archives. Edward's grandfather had established a trust that would transfer controlling interest in the company to Edward on his 40th birthday, now just 6 months away. The final piece clicked into place when I reviewed our prenuptial agreement, a document I had signed with little negotiation 10 years earlier. Clause 23b stated that in the event of infidelity on my part, I would forfeit all claims to marital assets and property. A separate clause noted that if our marriage ended before Edward's 40th birthday, certain trust disbursements would accelerate. The picture became crystal clear. If I could be proven unfaithful, Edward would gain immediate control of his trust, solving the company's financial issues while completely cutting me out of any claim to the wealth I had spent a decade helping to build. My husband and his family were setting me up. With Nicole's help, I established a comprehensive counter-surveillance operation. Every meeting I took included witnesses and time-stamped evidence of my whereabouts. Hidden cameras installed in my home office caught Elaine searching through my desk drawers when she thought I was out. Voice-activated recording devices captured Vivian and Harold discussing their plan to save Edward from that woman before she ruins everything. Most damning of all were the files I discovered on Elaine's cloud storage when Nicole helped me access it remotely. Dozens of photos of me with male colleagues, all taken without my knowledge, all carefully cropped or edited to appear suspicious. In one, a group of 6 people had been cropped out, leaving just me and Tim standing close together. In another, a friendly hug with my cousin visiting from Ohio had been captured from an angle that made it look intimate. I consulted discreetly with an attorney, presenting the evidence I had gathered. "They're building a case for infidelity," she confirmed, after reviewing the materials. "Not enough for court, but certainly enough to pressure you into a disadvantageous settlement if your husband confronted you with it." "What should I do?" I asked, still reeling from the magnitude of the betrayal. "Document everything. Continue gathering evidence and decide how you want this to end. Do you want to save your marriage, or are you prepared for it to be over?" I honestly didn't know. The Edward I thought I had married would never participate in something so deceitful, but the evidence of his involvement was undeniable. All I knew for certain was that I would not be the victim in whatever scheme the Harcourts had planned. So I waited, watched, and prepared. When the invitation came for Harold and Vivian's 45th anniversary dinner, I knew the trap was about to be sprung. Edward insisted we attend, despite the obvious tension between us in recent weeks. "It's important to the family," he said, his go-to phrase whenever I tried to establish boundaries. For once I agreed without argument. "Of course we'll go. I wouldn't miss it." The night of the dinner, I dressed with particular care in a conservative blue dress that Vivian had once complimented. I styled my hair simply, applied minimal makeup, and wore the pearl earrings that had been a gift from Harold on our 5th anniversary. The perfect, dutiful daughter-in-law, walking willingly into their trap. But in my purse, carefully organized in a leather portfolio, was every piece of evidence I had gathered over the past month. And clipped to my bra, invisible beneath my dress, was a recording device Nicole had provided, just in case things get ugly. As Edward drove us to his parents' home, I felt strangely calm. Whatever happened tonight would determine the course of the rest of my life. I was as prepared as I could possibly be. The Harcourt mansion was illuminated like a Christmas display when we arrived, with valet parking for guests and caterers bustling through the service entrance. Edward handed over the keys to our BMW with practiced ease, then offered me his arm as we ascended the wide stone steps to the front door. "Ready?" he asked, and I wondered if he realized the double meaning in his question. "Absolutely," I replied, squeezing his arm with false affection. The door opened before we could ring the bell, revealing Vivian in a silver evening gown that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her smile was brittle as she air-kissed my cheeks. "Gertrude, darling, so glad you could make it. We were beginning to wonder if work would keep you away as usual." The barb was delivered with such practiced sweetness that an outsider would never detect the venom. I smiled warmly in return. "I wouldn't miss celebrating your 45 years of marriage for anything in the world, Vivian. It's such an inspiration." She looked momentarily thrown by my enthusiasm, but recovered quickly. "Well, come in. Everyone's in the great room." Everyone turned out to be about 30 people, a mix of family members and the Harcourts' closest friends. I recognized most of them from previous gatherings, though a few faces were new. One in particular caught my attention: James Porter, the private investigator, dressed in an ill-fitting suit and looking distinctly uncomfortable among the wealthy crowd. "Edward, my son." Harold's booming voice carried across the room as he approached us, champagne flute in hand. His smile didn't reach his eyes when they landed on me. "And Gertrude, lovely as always." The subtle emphasis on always made my skin crawl, but I maintained my pleasant expression. Harold, congratulations on 45 remarkable years. The house looks beautiful. All Vivian's doing, he replied dismissively before turning back to Edward. Come say hello to Bill Stevens. He's considering a significant investment in the Eastern Distribution Center. And just like that, I was abandoned in favor of business. Typical. I made my way through the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server and exchanging pleasantries with various guests. Most conversations followed the same pattern. Polite inquiries about my work followed by glazed expressions when I actually answered, then quick pivots to gossip about people I barely knew. Elaine materialized at my side as I contemplated a second glass of champagne. Unlike her mother's silver ensemble, she had opted for blood red. Her dark hair swept into a severe updo that emphasized the sharpness of her features. Enjoying yourself? She asked, her tone suggesting she knew the answer was negative. Immensely, I lied. Your parents certainly know how to celebrate. Mother has always believed important occasions deserve proper recognition. Her eyes gleamed with something that made me uneasy. Family milestones especially. Before I could respond, a server announced that dinner was served, and we all migrated to the formal dining room. The massive mahogany table had been extended to accommodate all 30 guests, with Harold and Vivian at opposite ends. Edward and I were seated on one side, with Elaine directly across from me. James Porter, I noticed, was placed just 2 seats away from her, close enough for easy conversation. The meal progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Conversation flowed around business successes, vacation properties, and the accomplishments of various children and grandchildren. I contributed when appropriate, but mainly observed the dynamics around me. Edward grew increasingly quiet as dinner progressed, responding to direct questions but otherwise staring at his plate. Elaine, by contrast, became more animated, exchanging significant glances with her mother and occasionally leaning to whisper something to Porter. After the dessert plates were cleared, Harold stood and raised his glass. I want to thank everyone for joining us to celebrate 45 years of marriage to my beautiful wife. Polite applause followed as he continued. Family has always been the foundation of our success. Loyalty to family above all else has guided every decision I've made in business and in life. He looked pointedly at Edward during this last statement. My husband shifted uncomfortably beside me. To family loyalty, Harold concluded, raising his glass higher. To family loyalty, the guests echoed, drinking to the toast. As the servers poured coffee, Vivian stood next. We have a special guest with us tonight. James Porter is a dear family friend who has recently been helping us with some sensitive matters. James, would you mind saying a few words? Porter looked like he would rather be anywhere else but rose obediently. Thank you, Mrs. Harcourt. I'm honored to be included in this celebration. In my line of work, I don't often see marriages that last nearly half a century. It's a testament to your commitment and, as Mr. Harcourt said, loyalty. The word hung in the air like a curse. I felt Edward tense beside me. Speaking of commitment, Elaine interjected smoothly as Porter resumed his seat. I think we need to discuss something important before the evening concludes. The room quieted as she reached beneath her chair and produced a manila folder. My heart began to race, but I kept my expression neutral. Edward, she said, turning to my husband with manufactured concern, as your sister, I cannot in good conscience remain silent any longer. She slammed the folder onto the table with dramatic force, then flipped it open. Inside were dozens of photographs, which she began to spread across the table one by one. Your precious wife. With other men, she hissed, her eyes gleaming with triumph. Each photo landed with the force of an accusation. Me laughing with Tim over lunch. Me hugging my cousin outside his hotel. Me entering a conference room with male colleagues. All innocent moments, all framed to appear suspicious. We hired Mr. Porter when we became concerned about Gertrude's increasingly suspicious behavior, Elaine continued, playing to her audience. The long hours, the business trips, the constant texting with men who aren't her husband. A gasp went through the room. Edward still wouldn't look at me. His face drained of color. How could you do this to our son? Vivian asked. her voice trembling with what I now recognized as rehearsed emotion. "After everything we've done for you, welcomed you into our family, provided for you." Harold shook his head gravely. "I've always had reservations about your character, Gertrude. A woman so focused on her career rarely has the moral fortitude for true family commitment." The weight of their coordinated condemnation pressed down on me as 30 pairs of eyes stared in judgment. Edward remained silent, his betrayal more painful than all the others combined. I felt my hands trembling as I slowly reached for my purse. But it wasn't fear causing the tremors. It was fury. The dining room had fallen into a hush, all eyes fixed on me as I reached into my purse and removed the leather portfolio. I placed it carefully on the table, smoothing my hand over its surface before looking up to meet Elaine's triumphant gaze. "Before everyone jumps to conclusions," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "I think we should examine these photos more carefully." I opened the portfolio and removed a stack of documents, organized with labeled tabs for easy reference. "This first photo of me and Tim at Paulina Grill," I began, selecting one of the images Elaine had thrown down. "Would you mind telling everyone when it was taken, Elaine?" She blinked, caught off guard by my composure. 2 weeks ago. Tuesday." I nodded and extracted a document from my portfolio. "Interesting. Here's the receipt from that lunch showing 6 meals and drinks, not 2. I passed it to the person nearest me, a cousin of Edward's, who looked deeply uncomfortable. "And here's a group photo taken by the waiter showing me, Tim, and our entire creative team discussing the Johnson campaign." The full image clearly showed 4 other people at the table, cropped out of Elaine's version. "This one," I continued, picking up another photo showing me embracing a man outside a hotel, "is particularly interesting. Elaine, when your investigator took this, did he bother to take any additional shots? Perhaps one showing this man's wife and 2 children who joined us moments later?" I produced several more photos showing the complete scene, me with my cousin David, his wife Laura, and their kids, all wearing matching family reunion t-shirts. "This is David, my first cousin from my mother's side. We grew up together in Columbus. He was in Chicago for his company's conference and brought his family to visit." Edward finally looked at me, confusion replacing the hurt in his eyes. "And these hotel photos," I said, moving methodically through the evidence, "taken during the Detroit client meeting. Your investigator did an excellent job capturing me entering the Westin with my male colleague. Did he also document us checking into separate rooms? Or perhaps the client dinner with 15 people in a private dining room, recorded on the corporate credit card?" I laid out key card records, receipts, and corroborating emails for each accusation. With each piece of evidence, the atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. "But let's discuss why these photos exist in the first place," I said, my voice growing stronger. "For months I felt watched, monitored. My privacy invaded in ways that made me question my own sanity." I turned to Edward. "When I tried to tell you something was wrong, you dismissed me as paranoid, called me ridiculous, said your family would never do anything to hurt me." His face had grown increasingly pale as I spoke. "So I started investigating on my own. I removed more documents from my portfolio. With help from my friend Nicole in cybersecurity, I discovered spyware installed on all my devices. Spyware traced back to IP addresses registered to this house, Elaine's apartment, and most surprisingly, devices registered to you, Edward." Murmurs rippled through the dinner guests as I laid out printed logs showing access dates and locations. "I became curious about Mr. Porter here," I continued, nodding toward the investigator, who was now staring fixedly at his water glass. "So, I did some investigating of my own. I produced photographs of Elaine meeting with Porter, time and date stamped. I found it odd that our joint account showed payments of $2,000 monthly to Porter Investigations, especially since you never mentioned hiring a private investigator, Edward." My husband's face had progressed from pale to ashen. Most interesting of all was when I accessed Harcourt Manufacturing's recent financial filings. I withdrew several pages of financial statements, 2 consecutive quarters of significant losses, coinciding with Edward's 40th birthday approaching in 6 months. Harold stood abruptly. "That's confidential company information. Public records for a publicly traded company," I corrected calmly. but it helped me understand the urgency behind this little scheme. When I reviewed our prenuptial agreement, I extracted the relevant pages, highlighted for emphasis. Clause 23b states that in the event of infidelity on my part, I forfeit all claims to marital assets. And if our marriage ends before Edward's 40th birthday, his trust fund accelerates its disbursement schedule. I looked directly at Harold. The company needs cash. Edward's trust would provide it, but only if I'm out of the picture before his birthday. Hence, the elaborate setup to catch me cheating. The room had gone deathly silent. Even the servers had stopped moving, transfixed by the unfolding drama. The surveillance was comprehensive, I continued, laying out more evidence. Hidden cameras in my office caught Elaine searching my desk when I wasn't home. I played a brief video clip on my phone showing exactly that. Voice-activated recording devices captured some illuminating conversations. I pressed play on another recording. Harold's voice filled the room. Once we have enough evidence, Edward will have no choice but to divorce her. The prenup is ironclad. She'll get nothing. Vivian's voice responded. It's for his own good. She was never right for this family. Edward stood suddenly, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. Stop, please. I looked up at my husband, seeing genuine horror in his eyes for the first time. Did you know? Were you part of this? He shook his head, then nodded, then shook it again. They said they were concerned about you. Said you might be unhappy looking elsewhere. Dad suggested we just make sure. For my protection. I never thought. You never thought they'd manufacture evidence? Manipulate photos? Spy on your wife? My voice broke slightly. You never thought to trust me or ask me directly? Elaine slammed her hand on the table. She was taking you away from us. Ever since you married her, you've been different. Questioning family decisions, missing events for her work functions, putting her before family. That's what marriage is, Elaine. Edward shouted, startling everyone with his vehemence. Gertrude is my family too. Harold attempted to regain control of the situation. Now let's all calm down. This has clearly been a misunderstanding, Gertrude. These precautions may seem extreme, but we were only protecting family interests. Surely you can understand our concern when your behavior became erratic. My behavior was never erratic, I replied coldly. I was succeeding in my career while trying to be part of a family that never truly accepted me. And instead of celebrating my success, you saw it as a threat and constructed an elaborate plot to discredit me. I turned to Porter, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. I wonder what the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation would think about your methods, Mr. Porter. Illegal surveillance, doctoring evidence, conspiracy to commit fraud. Seems like grounds to revoke your investigator's license at a minimum. Porter's eyes widened in alarm. And Harold, I continued, the board of directors might have questions about using company resources for a personal vendetta. The payments to Porter from the corporate expense account could be particularly problematic from a governance perspective. Harold's face flushed dark red. Are you threatening me, young lady? I'm stating facts, I replied evenly. Just as I've been doing all evening. Vivian had collapsed into genuine tears, her perfectly applied makeup creating dark streaks down her cheeks. We were only trying to protect our son, she whispered. No, I said firmly. You were trying to control him as you always have. And you were willing to destroy me in the process. I gathered my evidence back into the portfolio and stood. Edward, I'm taking a car home. You're welcome to join me when you've decided where your loyalty truly lies. As I walked out of the dining room, the shocked silence of 30 dinner guests followed me like a wave. I had just publicly dismantled one of Chicago's most prominent families, and for the first time in 10 years I felt truly free. The car ride home would have been silent if not for the occasional ping of incoming text messages on Edward's phone. He had followed me out of his parents' house without a word, ignoring his mother's tearful pleas and his father's stern commands to handle your wife. Neither of us spoke until we were inside our brownstone with the door firmly locked behind us. Edward collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands. I don't even know where to begin, he said finally, his voice hollow. I stood by the window, arms crossed protectively over my chest. Did you know about all of it? The surveillance, the private investigator, the doctored photos. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. Not all of it. Not at first. He took a shuddering breath. Dad came to me about 3 months ago. Said he was concerned about changes in your behavior. Said sometimes when a woman gets a big promotion, she starts looking for excitement elsewhere too. He suggested we just make sure everything was okay. And you believed him rather than talking to me. The hurt in my voice was palpable. I didn't know what to believe, Edward admitted. You were working late, traveling more. There were texts at odd hours. When Dad showed me the first photos, they looked suspicious. I should have questioned them more, but you trusted your family over your wife, I finished for him. He nodded miserably. I'm so sorry, Gert. I never thought they would go this far. When Elaine started talking about the prenup and my trust fund last week, I realized this wasn't just about protecting me. But by then I felt trapped. If I backed out, I'd be admitting I'd betrayed you. If I went forward, I'd be complicit in their plan. So you chose complicity, I said flatly. I chose wrong, he whispered. I've never been so ashamed in my life. We talked until dawn, painful truths spilling out between us. How Edward had never truly separated from his family emotionally. How I had suppressed my resentment of their treatment to keep the peace. How we had both failed to build a marriage strong enough to withstand external pressures. Around 5 in the morning, Edward's phone rang. It was Elaine calling for the 4th time. He finally answered, putting it on speaker. You need to control your wife, she hissed without preamble. Do you have any idea of the damage she's done? The Andersons left in the middle of dessert. The Bradleys were still there when I went upstairs. Everyone is talking. Good, Edward replied, his voice stronger than it had been all night. Let them talk. Maybe they'll all think twice before trying to destroy someone's reputation. She's turned you against your own family, Elaine said, her voice cracking. Can't you see that's what she's wanted all along? No, Elaine. You and Mom and Dad turned me against Gertrude. You made me doubt the one person who has consistently supported me, even when I didn't deserve it. We were trying to protect you. You were trying to control me, Edward countered, echoing my earlier words. And I let you because it was easier than standing up for myself and my wife. That ends tonight. He hung up without waiting for her response. The next morning, a call came from Harold's attorney offering a settlement if I would sign confidentiality agreements regarding the events at the anniversary dinner. Edward refused on both our behalves without consulting me, his first real act of independence from his family. I'm taking a leave of absence from the company, he announced after ending the call. I need time to figure out what I want, separate from what they've always expected. We met with our own attorney that afternoon, discussing potential legal actions against Porter and the Harcourts. While we had grounds for lawsuits on multiple fronts, the public exposure would prolong the pain for everyone involved. Let's start with the formal cease and desist regarding all surveillance and investigation activities, our lawyer suggested. We can always escalate if they don't comply. Word of the anniversary dinner confrontation spread quickly through the Harcourt extended family. Edward's cousin Stephanie called to express her support, admitting she'd always found Vivian and Harold's treatment of me disturbing. His Aunt Barbara, Harold's sister, reached out next. I've been waiting 20 years for someone to stand up to my brother, she told me over coffee at a neutral cafe. He's always used money and family loyalty to control everyone around him. What you did was long overdue. Other relatives chose sides, creating factions within the previously unified Harcourt clan. Some believed I had humiliated the family patriarchs and deserved condemnation. Others saw the event as the inevitable result of years of manipulation and control. A week after the dinner, Vivian appeared unannounced at our front door. I was home alone, Edward having gone for a long run to clear his head. May I come in? She asked, looking smaller and older than I had ever seen her. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup, replaced by a simple sweater and minimal cosmetics. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. I owe you an apology, she said once we were seated in the living room, though I doubt any apology could be sufficient. Why? I asked simply. Why go to such lengths to destroy me? Vivian stared at her clasped hands. I told myself it was to protect Edward, to protect the family legacy. But the truth is far less noble. She looked up, her eyes wet with unshed tears. I was jealous of your youth, your success, your independence. All things I sacrificed to be the perfect Harcourt wife. That was your choice, I pointed out. No one forced you to give those things up. Didn't they? She gave a bitter laugh. You have no idea the pressure Harold put on me when we were first married. To quit my teaching job, to focus solely on being his wife, Elaine, and Edward's mother, the Harcourt hostess. By the time I realized what I had given up, it was too late to get it back. So, you wanted me to make the same sacrifices? I wanted to believe they were worth making, she admitted quietly. If you could have the career and the marriage, then what did that say about all my choices? We talked for nearly an hour, not resolving anything, but at least beginning to understand each other. As she was leaving, Vivian turned back. Harold will never apologize, she warned me. He doesn't believe he's done anything wrong. In his mind, everything he does is justified if it benefits the family business. And Elaine, Vivian sighed. Elaine has always defined herself solely as a Harcourt. She has no identity separate from the family. Your independence threatens her entire sense of self. When Edward returned and I told him about his mother's visit, he seemed cautiously optimistic. It's a start, he said. More than I expected, honestly. The following day, Edward met with Elaine at her request. He returned looking emotionally drained but somewhat relieved. She cried, he reported, sounding surprised. Said she never meant for things to go so far. Admitted she was jealous of our relationship, and my relationship with you. Dad apparently had her convinced that if she helped save me from your influence, she'd finally earn his full approval. Do you believe her? Edward considered the question carefully. I believe she believes it. Elaine has always been desperate for Dad's approval in a way I never was. It made her vulnerable to his manipulation. Over the following weeks, we established firm boundaries with the Harcourt family. Edward began therapy to address the enmeshment patterns that had shaped his relationship with his parents and sister. I supported his journey while working through my own feelings of betrayal and hurt. We decided to sell the brownstone, wanting a fresh start in a home without Harold and Vivian's financial fingerprints. Edward took a consulting position with a manufacturing firm outside the Harcourt orbit, earning less but experiencing a freedom he had never known. My workplace became an unexpected source of support through the crisis. When I shared a sanitized version of events with my boss, explaining my recent distraction, she was unexpectedly understanding. Family business drama is its own special hell, she said with the wisdom of experience. Take the time you need to sort things out. Your position will be waiting. As fall turned to winter, Edward and I began rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty and equal partnership. The trust that had been shattered at the anniversary dinner was slowly being reconstructed, one difficult conversation at a time. I never want to be that weak again, Edward confided one night as we lay in bed, letting other people define my priorities, my relationships. I'm sorry it took almost losing you to understand what really matters. We both made mistakes, I acknowledged. I ignored red flags for years because confronting them was uncomfortable. I let myself be diminished to keep the peace. The first holiday season away from the Harcourt family traditions was both liberating and strange. Instead of the formal Christmas Eve dinner at the mansion, we volunteered at a local shelter, then spent a quiet evening at home. For New Year's, we flew to Puerto Rico with 2 couples from my work, enjoying anonymity and sunshine instead of Harold's annual black tie gala. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of anger, lingering trust issues to work through. But for the first time since our wedding day, I felt like Edward and I were truly partners, facing the world together instead of navigating around his family's expectations. 1 year after the anniversary dinner that changed everything, Edward and I stood in the kitchen of our new home, a renovated farmhouse in Michigan's harbor country, just 90 minutes from Chicago but worlds away from our former life. Large windows overlooked Lake Michigan in the January snow, creating a peaceful landscape outside while we remained warm inside. Happy anniversary, Edward said, handing me a mug of coffee and kissing my temple. Not our wedding anniversary, But the anniversary of the night we had finally seen the truth about the Harcourt family dynamics and begun our journey toward authentic partnership. Hard to believe it's been a year, I replied, leaning against the counter. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, other times like yesterday. Edward nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. I talked to Mom yesterday, he said after a moment. She asked if they could visit in the spring. I told her we'd think about it. This was progress. For the first 6 months after the confrontation, all communication with the Harcourts had gone through attorneys. Gradually, Edward had established limited contact with his mother, who seemed genuinely interested in repairing their relationship on healthier terms. How did she take it? I asked. Better than she would have a year ago, he said with a small smile. She actually said she understood our need for boundaries. I think her therapy is helping. Vivian's journey toward self-awareness had been one of the more surprising developments of the past year. After decades as Harold's perfectly coiffed appendage, she had begun the difficult work of reclaiming her own identity. She had returned to watercolor painting, a passion abandoned in her 20s, and was taking classes at the Art Institute. Harold remained largely unchanged, though the events of the past year had diminished his power over the family. When Edward resigned from Harcourt Manufacturing, several key clients had followed him to his new consulting firm, creating a significant financial impact. The board of directors had launched an investigation into Harold's use of company resources for personal matters, resulting in a formal censure and restrictions on his authority. Most significantly, Edward had legally restructured his inheritance trust with the help of his grandfather's original attorney, removing Harold as trustee and eliminating any possibility of acceleration based on his marital status. The company would need to solve its financial issues without using Edward's inheritance as a quick fix. Elaine's transformation had been the most dramatic and unexpected. The exposure of her role in the plot against me had created a minor scandal in their social circle, leaving her temporarily ostracized from the world that had defined her. In the aftermath, she had experienced what she later described as an identity crisis that was probably 30 years overdue. After months of therapy and self-reflection, she had enrolled in graduate school for art history, pursuing a long-abandoned interest from her undergraduate days. Her relationship with Edward had slowly begun to heal, though she and I maintained a careful distance, our interactions polite but limited. Do you ever regret it? Edward asked as we moved to the living room with our coffee. Standing up to them that night, it changed everything. I considered the question seriously. I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. I regret that things had to get so bad before they could start getting better. But no, I don't regret standing up for myself. For us. Edward had undergone his own transformation. After leaving the family business, he had discovered a talent for helping struggling manufacturing companies modernize their operations. His consulting work allowed him flexible hours and the satisfaction of solving real problems rather than navigating family politics. The reduction in income had been significant, but the increase in his happiness and our relationship quality was immeasurable. I was thinking about what Dr. Phillips said in our session last week, Edward said, referring to our couples therapist, about how sometimes the most painful betrayals can lead to the greatest growth if we're willing to learn from them. I nodded, remembering the conversation. It's true. As awful as that night was, I'm not sure we would have ever broken free from the dysfunctional patterns without something that dramatic. Our marriage had emerged stronger through the crisis and subsequent healing work. We communicated more openly, respected each other's boundaries, and made decisions as true partners. The pretense and peacekeeping that had characterized our first 10 years together had been replaced by genuine intimacy and trust. I talked to that real estate agent in Saugatuck, Edward mentioned, changing the subject. The storefront on Butler Street is still available if you want to look at it next weekend. Another unexpected development of the past year had been my decision to step back from corporate marketing and open a small design studio focusing on helping local businesses. The idea had been percolating for years, but I had never had the courage to pursue it until facing down the Harcourts gave me a new perspective on what I was capable of. I'd like that, I agreed. Nicole said she'd be interested in handling the digital security side if we decide to move forward. Nicole had remained a steadfast friend through everything, Her early skepticism of the Harcourts vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. She had recently left her corporate position to start her own cybersecurity consultancy, inspired partly by my decision to pursue independence. As the morning sunlight streamed through our windows, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. I had learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong, rather than dismissing my concerns to keep the peace. Edward had learned that true family loyalty meant holding loved ones accountable, rather than enabling harmful behavior. Together, we had discovered the freedom that comes from setting healthy boundaries, and the strength that emerges from facing difficult truths. The irony wasn't lost on me that Harold's toast to family loyalty had ultimately led to the dismantling of the toxic version of loyalty he had enforced for decades. In its place, Edward and I were building something healthier, a partnership based on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine support. We had also expanded our definition of family beyond blood relations. Friends like Nicole, colleagues who had supported me through the crisis, Edward's Aunt Barbara who had broken ranks to stand with us, even our therapists who had guided our healing journey. These connections formed a chosen family that nourished rather than depleted us. As we discussed plans for the coming spring, the future felt open with possibilities in a way it never had during our years orbiting the Harcourt family sun. We were considering starting a family of our own, now that we had done the work to break generational patterns of control and manipulation. Whatever happened to James Porter? I asked suddenly, remembering the uncomfortable private investigator at the anniversary dinner. Edward laughed. Lost his license after 3 other clients filed complaints. Apparently, our situation inspired others to come forward. Last I heard, he was working security at a mall in the suburbs. There was a certain poetic justice in that, though I took no pleasure in anyone's downfall. The past year had taught me that holding on to resentment only extended the damage others had tried to inflict. Looking back, the most valuable lesson from the entire ordeal was learning to stand firmly in my own truth, even when powerful people were invested in undermining it. The moment I had reached for my purse at that dinner table, trembling not with fear but with righteous anger, had marked a turning point, not just in our marriage, but in my understanding of my own strength. Betrayal had indeed taught me brilliance, not by making me harder or more suspicious, but by revealing the clarity and power that comes from absolute authenticity. By trying to destroy me, the Harcourts had inadvertently forced me to become unshakable in my sense of self, a gift I would never have sought but now wouldn't trade for anything. "I'm proud of us," Edward said, taking my hand as if he could read my thoughts. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined being this happy, this free. I squeezed his hand in return. Sometimes the things we think will break us actually remake us into something stronger. This spring we're breaking ground on my new design studio right here on our property, and a little one is on the way. We're building a new legacy, one based not on wealth or control, but on love, respect, and the freedom to be ourselves. The storm we weathered didn't just fail to sink us. It washed away the wreckage and revealed the solid ground where we could finally build a life that was truly our own. Have you ever had to stand up to people who tried to tear you down? How did you find the strength to speak your truth when it felt like everyone was against you? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of betrayal and redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of finding strength through adversity. Remember, sometimes the people who try to dim your light are just afraid of how brightly you shine. Thank you for listening, and until next time, trust yourself first.